Coming up, with the Brooklyn Nets 2 games into their Kevin Durant-less journey, we take a look at some quotes from Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and Jacque Vaughn and start to ask the tough questions. Can this team sustain and win ball games in the absence of their superstar? We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Marbeck breaking down the playoff-winning New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we got to dive in a little bit here. We're going to ask the question, I think, later on about the pulse of where we feel about this team in the absence of Kevin Durant. But we've got some post-game quotes. We've got injury updates around Ben Simmons. And it's all starting to just give me a little bit of that something in the pit of my stomach that I'd rather not be feeling.
We talked about that, or I talked about this a little bit in the post game yesterday. And while I don't think it's fully panic time, it's only been 2 games. We sort of expected there to be some backsliding for sure without Durant, because when you lose Durant, you lose one of the best players in the game. That's basically understood. I do think this next stretch of games is going to be interesting. The quotes for what you can read from them, which we'll go through, tell something of an interesting story. Sometimes it's just kind of put up or shut up time when it comes to stuff that happens on the court, which I think we're also in that kind of zone as well. But yeah, this is an interesting time for Nets folks, because it's on the one hand, this isn't the final iteration of the team, at least a team that has championship aspirations. And you kind of also would hope there'd be some resolve around the idea that with Durant not being there, because there's still plenty of talent on this team. And so it is hard right now to know how to evaluate the current situation. I don't think it's full-blown panic button. At the same time, there are some sort of troubling stuff that's happened over the first 2 games without him that you're like, that's not amazing. Right. And we'll get into some of those things. Some of the quotes, some of just the stats, it's not amazing. And we know that this stuff can turn around pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, and the first game being against Boston, we knew that was going to be difficult. OKC's playing good basketball. You talked about the fourth quarter and how the Nets are struggling to find scoring, obviously, late in these games, which feels like a 1-to-1 about not having Kevin Durant. But we'll go from the top down here. Ben Simmons, who obviously was the late scratch against OKC, I will make sure that I frame this correctly, is expected to play Tuesday night versus the San Antonio Spurs. And the first quote comes from him, which, I think was the one that came out after the Boston game, where he said, being assertive, being aggressive, and knowing my team needs that. I think I was giving up the ball a few too many times. I know who I am. I know I need to get to the rim. I know I need to get buckets. That's also going to help my teammates and get them going. In the old put up or shut up category, I think this is where Ben Simmons is starting to fall, right? And we talked about it. You want to see him evolve. This is a great opportunity with no Kevin Durant out there. And again, he played 1 game, missed 1 game. Now the injuries are going to be a concern around him and managing those, as they've been all year. But 3rd game, 4th game, 5th game, 6th game, at some point, if you just don't start showing that you're being more aggressive and going at the rim, it's going to end up being that these quotes are kind of meaningless. These are great. Love the fluff. Would love if there was a little bit more substance to these. And we're already into the season. It's not like we're evaluating 1 game against Boston. We've been evaluating Ben Simmons over the course of this entire year.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't think I didn't have any grand takeaways from the Boston game, except it confirmed some, things that I'm a little worried about sort of long-term with him, but it didn't really change my thought process one way or the other. Like, Simmons is just a really, among the guys who are difficult to get a read on what's happening here, it's like Simmons is the hardest. It's very, very difficult to figure out what is going on here. There's so much context. There's so many stats that help him. There's so many stats that hurt him. There's context around this whole thing. And it just is so hard. I mean, look, the dude is less than around a half a year from getting back surgery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's that's a thing, right? Like you're coming back from back surgery. We can delve into like why one needs back surgery. You know what I mean? There's all these different reasons around this, and like whether those ultimately are the cures for different things related to the back. Then when you go through all the stats that he has, like some stats are great. Like the net rating for him on the season with him on the court is +5. They've been a positive team with him on the court, no doubt about it. When you remove Kevin Durant from the situation as Simmons without Durant, the numbers are completely negative. Okay, that's going to happen for a lot of guys like with that aren't Durant, but the numbers with him on the court without Durant are terrible, right? And so like, okay, so how do you read into that? And then you think, okay, well, even if you're a believer in Simmons and some of the stuff he does is really, really good, and the Nets clearly need it. Like they really needed him against OKC bad. Like with dynamic guard play, they needed him so bad last night or 2 nights ago when it came to dealing with 2 dynamic guards that the Thunder have. But then then you look at the other problem is like Simmons has missed more than a quarter of the games. Like can't play 30 minutes a game. Like he doesn't get to the foul line. Like it's just, I guess my point is going back and forth with all this is to say, no matter what side of the aisle you land on Simmons, another person can come from the other side and just make the opposite case. I can do both. I can make both cases for him very, very easily. And it just makes it so it's a really, really difficult situation to evaluate.
And it's funny because you said it in there. He's done. You really needed him against OKC.
Totally.
Also, he's dependent on Kevin Durant to be his best value to this team.
Okay, go ahead. Well, I think that I will say that maybe the jury might be still out on that because Durant played all the minutes this season. Like the team hasn't really played without Durant that often. So like the non-Durant minutes for Simmons was like 240 minutes. Like that's not tons. It's 600 together. So it's 2.5 times more minutes together than more apart. I'll even give him that one that the sample size is too small. The point is, it's sometimes with him tough to get a sample size on him because the injury stuff is a concern, and like that's just going to be a concern. That's not a knock on him. It just is true.
Yeah, it's just, that's what I was going to say.
Injuries have been a problem.
Because the other thing that I think that it's worth bringing up, and we talked about this coming to the preseason, there were the 2 things. There's the injury, and then there was the mental component of it, right? And he said he was dealing with 2 things: physical ailment, and then some issues in terms of being in the right headspace and feeling mentally comfortable. And we discussed how reporters have a difficult time asking about that type of thing because they frame it in kind of the category of injury. Hey, is the brain broken? When will it be working better? And it's not, it's understandable to not know the right way to approach that. But what I do think is interesting is Simmons addressed those pretty directly in the preseason and said, I've been working really hard on that. I keep up with it. And that's my plan, right? Is to make sure that just like exercising, just like working out, just like being conscious about my back, it's the same thing in terms of my mental health and making sure that I'm ready to play. Again, this isn't a knock on Ben Simmons, but that also is a part of this, especially when you think about the ability or the mentality to attack at the basket and whether or not, like, I wonder if there is a part of that. And I'm sure the Nets are tapped into it and monitoring it and being a support source if needed is how are we feeling mentally right now? Physically, you may be feeling good, right? And mentally, you may be feeling strong about certain facets of your game. But is there something that actually might be the cross section of injury concern and approach around a certain area of your game that actually does come together and makes it difficult for Simmons to go, hey, ball in hand, I'm driving down at the basket. I'm not worried about injury. I'm not worried about missing. I'm not worried about going to the free throw line where I struggle, right? All of those things can actually create, I think, a real area that he may just need to continue to work through. And it's hard, nay impossible, to say 2 weeks, he'll have that all sorted out, or a month, right? There's no way to put timelines on either component of what goes into Ben Simmons right now.
Yeah, like wherever you land, again, here's the other thing. Wherever you land on Simmons, like the mental piece of it will always be part of it. It's not made up. It's not just doesn't come out of thin air. It's something he's mentioned himself. Like it's very clear that this is part of it. Some of the things like that he hasn't done in basketball could easily be attributed to mental stuff. Like that's not a hot take. It's just the truth. This is where we land on Simmons. And like you just said, he's addressed it. He's addressed it openly in the media, and kudos to him. That's like super hard to do, right? For a long time, this never, ever would have come out like this, right? We're in a new day and age where this is something that can be talked about and can be admitted, and it doesn't make it easier, but it can still be done. So kudos to him for bringing it up. it's still a thing. Like, it's still a thing. Like, if you're rooting for the basketball part of this thing, it's something that will always be in the back of people's minds when it comes to how he approaches the game. When there seem to be aspects of the game that feel nothing more than mental, right? like that just feel like a mental part of it, like not going to the rim, not taking shots, doing these things that most other basketball players do in situations like his. It's just going to be a thing. No one is rooting harder for Simmons. He's the key to the team being great. If he's great, the team can be great. Like it's actually pretty 1-to-1. If everyone's healthy and Simmons is playing like we know he can play, the team is a championship probably favorite, right? But and believe me, when you do a podcast about the Nets, I hate to here's a little look behind the curtain.
Don't
you
expose
want
it all,
the team
Doug.
to win the championship, even if you didn't like the team. Like, even if you like the team, if you do a podcast about the team, you want the team to win the championship. It's like the easiest way to make your podcast, to have the podcast be great. So, like, we are rooting super hard for Simmons. It's just you have to talk about this stuff because it just is part and parcel for who he is as a player these days.
It very much reminds me as a New York-based sports fan, Chuck Knobloch years ago for the Yankees could not find the ball from his hand to first base. And that was a mental block that he struggled with and ultimately really came up in a big way to be a problem for the New York Yankees. Coming up here in a second, we'll go to a Jacque Vaughn quote that I think is straight out of the bag of cliche statements head coaches like to provide and whether or not they can actually get to a solution.
Not my guy, Jacque, the best interview in the game. All right, before we get to that, we're going to talk to you about our friends over at Rocket Money. Rocket Money was formerly Truebill. You've heard us talk about these guys because if you are like me, you have subscriptions out there. They're just sitting out there. You don't know if you're still subscribed to it. You don't know if you're still paying for it. It just kind of shows up on the ledger one day. You're out $19.99, $14.99. Believe me, the Dougster has been down this road many, many times. But not with Rocket Money. Rocket Money makes it easy because they get all that stuff into one place, unwanted subscriptions. It's going to also monitor your spending. It's going to help lower bills. It's just not those things. It's going to be sort of a manager for when it comes to your personal finance. 80% of people that have subscriptions, they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought just to watch the one TV show on, been there, or the free trial that you never even used, you're still signed up for, been there. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify your subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones you don't want. It makes canceling subscriptions as easy as a click of a button. There's not going to be any more surprises on those credit card statements. Every month, Rocket Money has you covered. Stop throwing your money away. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba. rocketmoney.com/lockedonnba.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look, as we said, a quote here from Jacque Vaughn in terms of maybe the temperature of the team and where the expectations are in the absence of Kevin Durant. It's positive times. We're feeling good. The morale around the group is really high right now. Oh, sorry. That was Josh Giddey talking about the win after the Oklahoma City Thunder beat the Brooklyn Nets. I apologize. Let me scroll down here, though. And here we are. This is much better, I think. The challenge for us as a group is to be able to sustain, said Coach Jacque Vaughn. That is harder mentally and physically because Durant does save you at times and gives you a bucket, and now your defense is set. So the challenge with this group is they have to dig in and have a mental fortitude greater than before because every possession does matter. There's mostly cliche stuff in there. Dig in, have a fortitude, really sink your teeth into the ball game. However, the line about Kevin Durant, I do think is critical. And we always talk about Kevin Durant and knowing how important he is on both ends of the floor. But that point about bailing out the team, getting you a bucket, and allowing the rest of the roster to get back and be set defensively, because percentage-wise, Durant's going to put most of those in. That actually does become, over the course of a 48-minute game, that's a grind, and that is a lift. And that's probably another element here when we talk about some of the pure scorers that can step in and fill some of that void. They have to also do this other thing with more consistency, with more effort, with more dedication. And we've always said the more effort you're putting in on one end of the floor can often drain you on the other.
Yeah, this is it's just the world that we knew they're going to live in, right? Like Durant is so important when you are this class of player. He's as important as it gets. He's the rare also player that's critical on both ends of the court for the team. And when you don't have him, it's going to sort of mess you up in the short term. Like he played 1 million minutes, like we said at the beginning. He's been basically the most available superstar in the NBA this year when it comes to minutes, right? He's just played so much, and he's done so much for the team on both ends of the court. When you don't have him, it's gonna mess up your processes on both ends of the court. Now, the Nets are seemingly talented enough to not be a bad team, right? Like I don't think anyone's going to call them a great team without him. I don't think it's just unrealistic, but they can easily not be a bad team with the current personnel they're going to have. And Vaughn, I think, is right in his assessment here about what they need to be able to do with him off the court. And but again, this is a situation where it's nice to say, like, let's see how it goes, because if you saw from the OKC game, the rotations were all over the place. Again, not having Simmons too hurts this. Like, having missing two of these guys was really, really a problem, right? Because they just had a
wrench and then another wrench.
It was just you can only lose so many guys, and you can only lose like 2 6'8" guys or above that are super awesome on defense, and two of your better offensive like playmakers, at least if you're going to consider Simmons as a connector, right? Like, you're gonna have problems. Every minute that's not those guys, that's Markieff Morris and Edmund Sumner, is going to be problematic. There's just no way around that. But like, at the same time, there's going to have to be some consistency, because this is not just a 2-game absence. Like, he's going to miss a lot of games. Yeah. It's just like probably to the All-Star break is probably a realistic thing. This is time away. And like through the trade deadline too, like, we're in a weird spot with him around this injury timeline. And we might be more headed, and especially from this quote from Vaughn, like, we might be more in the treading water territory than I thought. Like, I kind of didn't think this was going to be like that, but I'm starting to be concerned that it's going to be, hey, keep your head above water. Don't backslide into the abyss like they sort of did last year. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm less confident about it now than I was a week ago when he got hurt.
Well, it's funny. I call it a cliche line from Jacque Vaughn. Now, but the real component of it is a message to these guys of, no, I mean, you got to dig in. You're going to have to treat these games as much more high leverage than you normally would halfway through the season, 3/4 of the way through the season, as you work through this absence.
And can I say one thing about that? Like, it was obvious during the OKC game too. Like, he was pissed off a few times. He called quick timeouts when he saw that there was just breakdowns. He's been good about this, right? Doesn't like something, it's a quick timeout, and just to probably lay into somebody or multiple people. We saw that happen multiple times in OKC. He will dress these guys down, right? Yep. In terms of, if you're not hustling, if you're just missing assignments, not boxing out, missed defensive rotations. That was definitely a problem against OKC. And I don't think he cares. Like, from his side of it, there's no excuse. Like, it can't be like, hey, you're a little undersized. He's not gonna be like, hey, it's okay, you're a little undersized guard, it's all right. Like no, it's not gonna be like that. It's, hey, if you can't get it done, you have to at least try, because we are sort of just like skill deficient now with these guys out.
Well, and that's the weird thing too, I think, about this, is because it goes from being with Kevin Durant and with Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons and a lot of great shooters and some really great defensive pieces. Obviously, it becomes, we talked about this, come chase us. We set the tone. We set the tempo. It really is a mentality shift here, where now you're telling your guys, like, no, you're going to have to play some gritty basketball. You're going to have to grind it out. You're going to have to sacrifice some offensive possessions for what you can do defensively. And that is the rotations, the communications, the closeouts, right? All those little hustle minutes. I think the OKC game being the better sample in terms of opponent and what you feel like you could accomplish even without Simmons. A lot of that is then it's about execution, the X's and O's. And if you are Jacque Vaughn, to your point, well, I can look at results, start calling timeouts and say, hey, undersized or not, fundamentals matter, right? Running what was being asked of you matters. And if you're not doing those things, then these games, when you look at the schedule, San Antonio on Tuesday night, very winnable game. Well, suddenly, and we talked about this during the season too, this has become very losable games as well, if you're not doing what feels like the easy checks of making sure you're executing. Coming up here in a second, we're going to give a little Kyrie Irving quote, and then ask that question we thought maybe we were pushing back against. More hero ball for Kyrie Irving in Kevin Durant's absence? We'll get into that next.
All right, before we get into that, we're going to talk about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for all sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. If you go to betonline.net right now, you're going to see our Brooklyn Nets -6.5 road favorites against the San Antonio Spurs. That tells me, let's make it easy. Let's not get stressed out. BetOnline is telling us, BetOnline wants us to come in after the game. Just calm, cool, collected, nice little 6.5 cover. No big deal. We jump on live and BetOnline's got us covered. BetOnline's got you covered too for all of the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. NFL rolling through the playoffs, obviously basketball every single night. If you love sports podcasts, those are on BetOnline as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to get all of your betting info. Head on over to betonline.net to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And where we start then, as we dive in on a Kyrie Irving quote, which is really, I think, is a positive thing, reflecting back on where this team was from a year ago, but ultimately getting into the conversation around what do we need Kyrie to do now? And, he was asked about it as it was on a CBS Sports article here talking about the man at the center of Brooklyn's efforts without Kevin Durant is going to be Kyrie Irving. He first said that, I'm consistently in the lineup, so that helps. And that's reflective on last year to this year, obviously, and some of the injuries they dealt with, but then went on to say, we also don't have anyone who is halfway in the locker room. Everyone seems to believe that is reflective on one James Harden, who at whatever point last year, or maybe that one specific game we all watched, felt like, hey, this dude decided to check out. And if you tie it back into what Jacque Vaughn was saying in his sentiment and what we've talked about with this team, everybody does seem very bought in. There hasn't been any distractions. It has been all about the basketball. So I think, yes, Kyrie saying he's consistently available. Great. We want you to be consistently available and playing basketball. Saying James Harden bailed out. Great.
Is that just like a given?
I know. Like, that's not a problem. I'm knocking. It was like, well, isn't that kind of, yeah. Sort of that was the basic ask, Kyrie. You be available for basketball. Huzzah.
It's just so funny.
That one was a tricky one. But also throwing shade at the player that isn't on the team anymore. So it's not going to matter anyway. Like, by the way, if James Harden was still on the roster and you were like, guys that want to be here, hey, shots fired, teammate. You got to lock in. We need you without Kevin Durant. James Harden doesn't play for the Nets anymore. So he's not going to lock in. And if he is, it's going to be for the 76ers. So all that to say, Kyrie's in a hard spot here because now he's being thrust into this, vocal leadership role, something that I think he would very much prefer not to necessarily have to do, very understandably when it comes to the way the media and he have interacted. But we said about, like, do we not want hero ball from Kyrie? Trust the scheme, allow everything to flow. 15 points against OKC in a loss, you go, maybe hero ball, maybe some 40-point performances wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Does it feel like Kyrie is ready to do that? Like, is he ready to take over? And should he really ultimately? Because we're 2 games in. There's a lot of schedule here to play. I think every time that the Nets lose a game and he has under 20 points, you're going to look at his performance more critically.
Yeah, so I think Kyrie's like big scoring performances are different in some ways than like other superstars kind of performances. He gets his points in different ways than guys like Durant, the guys like Durant do, right? He's not sort of like, you hear the word heliocentric a lot, like when it comes to these high usage, just high on ball guys like, Jokic, like, I mean, Luke is the poster boy for this kind of thing right now, right? Like, Kyrie's just not that kind of guy. So like super high volume for Kyrie I do think it's like different than some of these other guys. So I'm actually not sure if tons more shots for him are like the way to go toward victory. What I do think is that like systems in place that get him good shots and also allow him to take the burden off of other guys in the form of just they get better looks. Like that's what needs to happen, right? Because like the great thing about Durant, especially this season with Durant, was that when other teams would double, when other teams would just kind of blitz him, he was really good about passing out, and he made it so difficult on other defenses that it would just open up better shots for literally everybody else. We saw the 2-man game with him and Claxton get better. They're getting Yuta Watanabe has been on the record being like, oh, dude, it's so easy. Just stand in the corner and just literally just drain these open threes every day. It's like I've never had it better, right? So it's like that is what needs to be better. It's not so much that like taking tons more shots. Let me put it this way. If they were the right kind of shots, I would love for Kyrie to take 40 shots.
Right.
Like if they're the wrong kind of shots, I don't want him to take any shot. Well, I want him to take, sub 20 shots because he needs to be making better shots for other people. It's like, this is the sort of the problem with the Kyrie Irving experience is that he's amazing. He is among the best, like just kind of individual scorers we ever seen. but his points, like there's a reason why he's always benefited from having someone else on the team that draws a lot of attention away from him, so he can just absolutely cook other defenders, as opposed that's why, like, let me put it this way. You mentioned Harden before. I think Kyrie, if the best version of like Kyrie, he could use Harden more than Harden needs him, right?
Yeah.
Like he needs these other guys. This is not a knock on him at all. It's just like how his game is predicated. When he has another guy on the team that like sort of just makes his life just a little bit easier, he just smokes these guys. When he's the best guy on the team, we do see that the offense can run into some problems. Some of that's on Vaughn. Like I think we saw this at times. Like Royce O'Neal was playing some point guard at times. Like trying to not making sure Kyrie's not bringing the ball up. Like I think they were trying some different stuff. That some they're starting and some there was like clearly like get it up the court. Like that was what he was doing, and then we'll run actions for Kyrie. Long story short, I don't think it's as easy as Kyrie gets more shots, they win. It's like they have to be running very specific stuff for him to make his life is easier, which will then make everyone else's life easier. If it's just him bringing the ball up the court and just trying to get the matchup he wants and just jacking up shots, I don't think that's the right thing.
No, and that's the irony about the absence of Kevin Durant. You want to look for the increased volume from everybody, but it's not this one-to-one of, okay, Kyrie, you take on that role that Kevin Durant was serving, and then someone will fill in your spot and fill in your spot. First of all, we all know you can't one-to-one replace Kevin Durant, but then even more so to your point, the way in which Kevin Durant functions offensively is not something that you can just replace. And the big difficulty here is because you mentioned the blitzing defenses on Kevin Durant. Well, what was it? Okay, he'll pass out of those very quickly. Sometimes it's an easy roll to the basket from Nicholas Claxton. Other times it was dumping it into Royce O'Neal at the top of the key right at the foul line there, and then letting him redistribute out, often to Kyrie Irving, right? So that second and third pass that comes off of it also increases the likelihood that Kyrie Irving is in a better position to take on a defender and shoot or drive at the basket and score. And all those things matter in a big way. And now it's become very disjointed for them.
And like blitzing Kyrie is just such a different thing. Like he's not big enough to pass over a big double team. Right. Like sometimes he can split the double team and that is going to really yield some huge things, but that's easier said than done. He's not going to be able to do that every time. And he's not like a massive, like just never stop running off ball guy, like a la Steph Curry, like that, where he's just going to show up at differently. Like where'd he just show up from? Right. Like he's just like, he was gone and now he's just appeared. Like he's not like that either. So it's just going to be hard to run all the offense through him for a lot of different reasons. Again, not really his fault. It's just why he's always thrived in these other situations where one or two other guys,
LeBron,
exactly. And look, everyone's going to be better with LeBron. Everyone's going to be better with KD, but there are some guys who will like really benefit from it. And I think he is one of them.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing they have to navigate here without Kevin Durant is that, and we've said this before, again, this isn't a Kyrie knock. This is a knock a lot of times based on size, skill set for a lot of guards in the league, as talented as they may be. You don't want Kyrie Irving to be your best player. You don't want him to have to be the best player. Let me put it that way. He can be your best player for games, for quarters, for stretches, but you prefer to have someone else over top of him for all the reasons that Doug laid out there about what it unlocks for you. So if we then by the way, I laughed there about that. I went back and chuckled again about I'm consistently available. It's still a classic. It's a classic line. It's like I tell Doug every time before we start recording, well, I keep showing up to record. I don't know why I'm not getting more accolades around that decision. Now, let's brass tacks this thing here before we get out the door. The Brooklyn Nets right now are still sitting in the number 2 seed, virtually tied with Milwaukee. They have one game better in the loss column, just a half a game up on Philadelphia and Cleveland. Thankfully, the Knicks are struggling a bit, so they still have a 2.5 game lead over the 6th seed. But when we look at their schedule now, starting with the Spurs coming up, we said at the top, this is not we're pushing the panic button. It's just discussing the issues that we thought were going to come up and whether or not they can navigate them. San Antonio, Phoenix, Utah, Golden State, and Philadelphia, all road games here that they're starting this 5-game trip on. Is there something that can happen or not happen across these 5 games where you'll start to have a higher level of concern before you get Detroit and New York and LA? And LA's been an interesting team game to game. The Lakers have been. How long is it before you say, okay, and maybe more specifically, how long before Sean Marks and this team has to say, do we need to do something here? Or are we revealing something that actually may be a bigger issue if we're waiting for Kevin Durant with bated breath to basically come back in and save this team.
Yeah, they're just in a tricky spot with this in terms of how they can view their team leading into the trade deadline. I don't really know. I don't think there's any sort of right answer here. I think that they're going to either have to be confident with what they think they have going forward without ever being able to see it. It's just going to be tough. I don't think they have the timeline just is just wrong around that. Now, where the things I'd like to see better. I mean, the first thing is just the fourth quarter scoring has to be better. That is just, it's been horrific. It's where they've lost both games. Especially, 38 total points in the fourth quarter in the last 2 games. They were outscored 65 to or 65 to 38 or something like that. Is terrible. They have to be better in the fourth quarter when the going gets tough. That'll be the first thing. They just have to beat the Spurs. I think that's it. If they lose to the Spurs, I will say I think the Spurs are bad, and there's no way around it. They have dealt with injuries. Vassal's out for the rest of the not maybe the rest of the year, is out for the next couple of months. They're 13-31 in the season. They have the worst point differential in basketball. They're arguably the worst team, right? And so I know it's on the road, but there's a reason a Kevin Durant-less Nets team is 6.5 point favorites against the Spurs. They stink in NBA terms.
Right.
If they were to lose this game with some of the same problems they've exhibited over this, I actually probably would be like, hey, we got some problems here, because if you can't win this one, it's just going to be hard from here on out. So I think I think as soon as, if you're hearing this Tuesday, as soon as tonight post game live on YouTube, you'll know, at least the short term feeling, because if it's a loss, it's going to be problems.
And so we'll get out of here, but I think the interesting thing is going to be for the off days and the post game, obviously after San Antonio, it's going to be the tease of for our podcast is, what does it mean if it looks that bad without Kevin Durant? What does that tell you about this team overall, short and long term? Because I do think you have to be making both decisions actively at the same time if you're Sean Marks. Hopefully, this is not the thing that we said we were hopeful would never happen this year, where we have this unraveling, right? Where we have this moment where we go, oh, not again. It's been about basketball. It's been about winning. It's been about positive vibes. They need to get this win against San Antonio to hold off any sense of things could really be getting ugly here quick.
All right. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. We'll be coming at you live after the game. What's that?
Good vibes, Brooklyn. We did it.
Oh yeah, I think it could be good vibes. I'm saying I think that we can use this as a nice little. This would be a nice little reset here.
That's right.
You can catch us live. On YouTube, following the game. Go subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube. Set those alerts so you know when we're going. We do extra stuff for YouTube, so that whenever we do post game lives, the podcast runs about 30 minutes. The post game live runs about an hour. So that's you're only going to get that on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube.
Hey, listen, it could be Ben Simmons that says it. It could be that Kyrie Irving comes out and says this here, right? Because it feels like the critics are coming. Everyone's got their eyes on you. Speak up and say, nobody puts baby in a corner. Johnny Castle.
Oh, they're making a sequel to that one, Dirty Dancing 2, coming down the pike there. Wait, that's Dirty Dancing, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, and there's Havana Nights. They did a little thing in Cuba.
Nah, it doesn't count. No. Not like I know. I actually never seen these movies. Okay, well, but one of the
there's no universe continuity. There was no continuity.
Yeah, Patrick Swayze showed up in the Havana Nights one, and he was not himself. Come on, what are you guys doing here? R.I.P. By the way. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.